I just wanted to do a little short prologue before we get into the video. When I made this initially, I kind of said something that might have sounded rude. I said something about that I felt like when people talked about unity versus divide and conquer, that a one world government was not a non-desirable thing. It is. But I said something like, oh, people are talking out the side of their necks and blah, blah, blah. And that's not what I meant when I referred to them talking about the one world government, but the sentiment really was that I felt like people aren't specific enough when they talk about unity versus separateness, and that they didn't specify that a one world government is a bad thing. Anyway, that's about it. Go easy on me. It's my birthday today. Woohoo! So I just wanted to do this really quick video because I've been seeing this a lot lately, and it's funny that just commensurate with my seeing it, one of my wonderful subscribers, who I don't think this person minds my using their comments, basically wanted to call my attention to the spelling of Mandela and how people spell it. So this person says, "Hi Jen, speaking about two L's, I have to tell you that I remember Nelson Mandela with two L's, not Mandela. And I love your cat." Well, who can argue with that, right? And then I said, OMG, I was just thinking of that. Why does everybody, including people who should know better, and of course that's tongue-in-cheek, because we all know that when it comes to the Mandela effect, knowing better is a moving target, put two L's in Mandela. Always been one L in my world. So very strange. And then this person says, "No, Jen, I mean it for real. For me, it was spelled with two L's, and I was always wondering why anybody of the affected didn't mention that. So here I am mentioning it because lately I've been noticing that a lot under videos too. Now, at first I just noticed it under my video, one of my biggest videos that I made about my friend appearing in two places at one time at her college graduation from the college that she transferred from, and then her regular college graduation where she was taking finals at the time of her old school college graduation. And you know, that's had about almost 780,000 hits since about a year and a half ago, and people would go under it and say the Mandela effect is a hoax, or it's just not real, and so on and so forth. So I just thought, you know, oh, they're not doing their research, and usually people who are trolls are just idiots anyway, so well, actually, they weren't being idiotic. They weren't like cursing or anything like that, but even still, they were just there to be trolly and contradictory and contrarian. That's the word I was looking for. So I just thought, you know, oh, well, they don't care. Half these people don't know the difference between your and your anyway, so I'm not impressed. And so what? They're just being idiots. But then, and lately, I've been watching other people's Mandela effect videos, and people who believe in the Mandela effect, I've noticed them making comments too. Now, of course, to spare the privacy of anybody else's videos, I'm not going to go in and show you examples, and I'm sure you've seen examples yourself. But it's just been so weird, and that was another thing, because also too, just in light of this whole double L phenomenon that we've been seeing going missing, and also in line with the Pythagorean numbers chart. The Pythagorean numbers chart is this one right here, and it's something that I brought up in my last video regarding the L's, and how double L's that I remember from my childhood in names such as Lily, Lilly, Philip, Phillip, and also in Michelle, Michelle, those have all been either disappearing or getting less, or they've been lessening. Now, people still spell names with double L's, but it's not as much. But it just sort of happened overnight that all of a sudden I was noticing that so many people now are spelling names without the double L, and it just seemed to come out of nowhere. Additionally, one of my friend's daughter's names is Lily, and I always thought she spelled it Lilly, and then all of a sudden, sometime after 2009, I realized she didn't, and this has been a Facebook friend for forever and a day. She's actually been a college friend. But what I had said that I noticed about the double L's is if you look on the Pythagorean numbers chart, if you look at the value of L, it's a 3. and it's pretty easy to follow. It's sequential. It just goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I to the 9th letter, and then goes back to 1 with the J. And my joke is that if we had a 27 letter alphabet and maybe we do in a parallel universe, that 27th letter would be 9. I was thinking of it the other day and thinking of it maybe as like a Q with 2 lines through it and one of them squiggles. And it would make that noise that goes, it would make the African clicking noise. That'd be kind of cool. Why don't we have the African clicking noise in our language? That would be so cool and fun and buoyant, but I digress. Oh God, I don't mean to use that phrase. That's reminiscent of a video maker we're not a big fan of. But in any case is my signature one. I say that far too much, but I'm gonna say it anyway because I don't know what else to say. In any case, I popped on over to Google the other day and just for shits and giggles, I spelled Mandela with 2 L's just to see what would happen. And it didn't let me. So it's just interesting, but I'm starting to think that maybe letters and spellings are kind of in flux. Because this is what happened in my computer today when I was just typing in Word. So I always remember that I used to spell diligent, D-I-L-L-I-G-E-N-T. And I've known that word for quite a long time. I even had a typewriter back in the early 90s that would go beep beep if I misspelled something. And I didn't use the word diligent a lot, but I did use it. And I never remember it dinging it on me for 2 L's. And then as you can see, if you go down to traveled, I would always put 2 L's in traveled, but apparently it accepts it as both. Canceled is another word. I was always mystified when in maybe the late 90s, all of a sudden it just had 1 L in it, and my computer was actually giving me problems for canceled with 2 L's. It was dinging me on it, but now it's gone back to not dinging me on it and accepting both. And of course Mandela we have, and then this is a little off kilter, but buses. Like this summer at my job, I have to do a lot of write-ups of reports for things, and we actually hire out buses, and so buses I would always spell it with 1 S, B-U-S-E-S. See, I'm not a 2-letter whore all the time. Buses was always B-U-S-E-S to me. I'm not a 2-letter S whore, but I started seeing my workmates spell it B-U-S-S-E-S, and the computer wasn't dinging them on it, and it's still not dinging them on it, and that just doesn't even look right to me. So what I'm wondering is if we're getting to a point in time, space, reality where we're kind of between 2 realities and it's shifty in the moment. And also going back to the Stallone banter that the guys were having on Mandela Monday, I think like a week and a half ago, and wherein it was called out that Stallone is now with 2 L's. I always remember Stallone as having had 2 L's in my world because, as we well know, I am a 2L whore. But regardless, a lot of people say that they remember it with 1 L. And it's interesting to me because Dan pointed out that now Stallone with 2 L's spells all 1. And then the Stallone with 1 L, and maybe somebody who's already pointed this out, the Stallone with 1 L is just alone. So you go from alone to all 1. And that's just really fascinating to me. So I guess I've always been in the all 1 world. I'd like to stay in it. I don't think it's necessarily a nefarious thing, but, you know, I guess it depends on the spin you put on it. Regardless, I just thought that was so fascinating. So, and my whole point with showing the Pythagorean numbers chart, and lest I forget, my goodness. My whole point with showing the Pythagorean numbers chart is that the L equals 3. So now there are less 33s in words. But then you go back from alone to all 1, and I don't know what to make of it. Because it seems like a mixed blessing and a curse. Unless, of course, people want to put the full-on Illuminati spin on the whole all 1 thing, which I never really cared for. I always thought it was kind of vague and just kind of, I mean, people want to talk about divide and conquer, but then they want to talk about there being a one-world government. So it seems like there's people talking out the side of their neck, and it's all a bunch of doublespeak. I don't think we truly know what's going on, and I think there are probably 2 siding factions trying to confuse us. But this is all very confusing, though. the last thing I did want to focus on, just in keeping with Nelson Mandela and the whole Mandela effect thing, is I think it was Moneybag73 who brought up the fact or the point that some people argue that we could be confusing Nelson Mandela with Steve Biko. Steve Biko was another anti-apartheid fighter in South Africa. Now, Steve Biko was one of the few who actually did die in prison. And the funny thing is that people have posited that, oh, you know, people are just confusing the death of Nelson Mandela for Steve Biko, and so on and so forth, and that he died in prison in the 80s. And I originally thought, and I don't know if this is a shift or just my bad memory, but I originally thought, after researching Steve Biko, that he died in 1979, not 1977. Because I remember thinking to myself when I saw that, I thought, well, 1979 is sort of on the cusp of the 1980s, so maybe, God, I do not know what that noise is. The robots are coming to get me and take me back to the universe from whence I came. But he spent 101 days in solitary confinement, and he was then killed in prison. Nelson Mandela, of course, was not. He went on to become South Africa, first black president. And it's just interesting because a lot of people, when I actually went back and read Fiona Broom's description about how the term Mandela effect came into play, and she spoke not only of people confusing when Nelson Mandela's death was, but of people, and this is either something I forgot or I had heard and I remembered it, but people actually seeing Nelson Mandela's funeral coverage on TV and remembering seeing it. And she never specified that if it was in America or not, although I'm assuming it was in America because she's an American, and I believe Dragon Con was in America. But I looked up Steve Biko's funeral on YouTube and online, and I couldn't find anything, at least nothing that seemed to be televised. The only thing I found was like documentary-style coverage, interspliced with other things. And then I also found an article on CNN.com, irrespective of what you think of them. This is, I believe, to be a legitimate article. Why is Steve Biko's remarkable legacy often overlooked? So, basically, he did not get a lot of play in the United States, and I don't ever remember hearing about him until I did my left turn foray into the amazing music of Peter Gabriel when I was in high school, and the only reason I ever knew who he was the song, Biko. It was a great song that Peter Gabriel recorded, but that was the only time I had ever heard of him, and this was decidedly at least 10 years after his death. And I also think it's interesting that he died on September 12th as well. But if you want to get into acknowledgments, we were actually kind of saturated with Nelson Mandela speak in the 80s, and it was funny because it had infiltrated pop culture. Bill Cosby's grandkids were named Nelson and Winnie, and they made references to them on that show all the time. Now, they didn't talk about his death, but I would think that most of us who were in this reality would not have thought that Nelson Mandela had died. I mean, unless we thought the Cosbys were naming their grandchildren that posthumously, but even still, I don't know, I just don't see the connection. And of course, when I looked Nelson Mandela up with other South African activists, other names came up. Desmond Tutu. I don't think that they would have confused Nelson Mandela for Desmond Tutu because he was also a very prominent name back in the day when all this was going on. And he is not dead yet. So they definitely would not have confused him for that. Oliver Tambo was another one that came to mind. I frankly had never heard of Oliver Tambo. He died in 1993, a year before Nelson Mandela took the presidency, and he died of a stroke. To the best of my knowledge, he did not die in prison. And there's really not much else that came up. I just think it's interesting. I just think it's interesting how the ways that people are rationalizing the confusion, I don't know, other than that there are some split realities going on. But regardless, tell me what you know, tell me what you think, tell me what you think about those missing L's, and also tell me how many L's you remember in the last name Mandela. All right, that's about all. Peace out.